Hey everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. So in this video we are essentially going to be looking at scene management, essentially restarting our scene, as well as setting up a transition from this scene to our main menu scene. Okay, so currently when we hit play and when we lose, we see the game over button. I'm going to go ahead and increase the speed a little bit. Okay, and now what we want is when we click this button, essentially, what we want to do is we essentially want to restart the scene. So the first thing that I can show you is if I go over here in my canvas, and if you go over to the game over button, all of our buttons have this button script on it, and over here there is an on click sort of a field where we can essentially tell it that every time it is clicked we want to run a certain behavior. Okay, so the way we can essentially do that is if I switch on over back to my code, what we can do is we can create a new function here. Okay, so let's say public void, and we'll call it on restart. Okay, and for now we'll just put a debug line in there, and we'll say time to restart. Okay, we're going to save and we're going to switch on over back into Unity. Once Unity has had a second to load, if I go over here and on my game over button, I can hit this plus icon, and it's expecting a game object here. Okay, so in my game over button, I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop my game manager, because on the game manager, we have the game manager script inside which we just wrote the function. So going back to my game over button, I can look for the function inside the game manager. So over here, these are all the scripts that are attached on our game manager. You can see our player input script, and you can see our game manager script. And inside our game manager script, there should be an on restart, which is the one that we just gave. So essentially what this means is that every time that this button is clicked, we want to run the code which is inside game manager.onRestart, which is the function that we just coded. Okay, this one. Okay, so switching back, if I hit play now, then we'll see that once the game over screen comes up, if I now hit the button, it gives me a debug log saying time to restart, which is a good start to how to get some functionality for our buttons. So when the user presses the button, what we want to do is essentially we want to find out what scene are we in, and we essentially want to restart it. So if you haven't already, you can click on File and you can hit Save, and when you hit Save, it's going to prompt you to save your scene. Now currently we have been working in this scene here called the sample scenes. You can also see the scenes here in your hierarchy. There is this folder here for scenes, and inside this here we have the sample scene. Another way to check what scene you're in is you can notice over here at the top of Unity, right next to the name of the project, it will show you the name of the scene. Okay, so for example, if I right click here and if I do create, and if I do create new scene, we'll call this main menu. Well, and if I double click on the scene, you'll notice how the name of the scene over here changed. Okay, so switching back to our sample scene, what we want to do is essentially when the user hits the restart button, we want to restart this scene. Now what I want to show you really quickly is if I click here on File, and if I go on Build Settings, you see here it says Scenes and Build, and it currently just shows the sample scene. So essentially Unity is only recognizing that there is one scene in this project, which is okay for now, but eventually we'll also want to add the main menu scene. So we'll come back to this in a second, and this will be important. But switching back to our script, what we need to do is, here is where we need to write the code for restarting our scene. In order to do that, what we need to use is one of the existing libraries for Unity, which is called Scene Management. So what we can do is we can come here all the way to the top, and we can say using Unity engine.scene management. Okay, and this essentially is like an import, which gives us some additional tools. Okay, so scrolling all the way back down here on our restart, what we want to do is scene manager dot load scene, and I will explain this. Scene manager dot get active scene dot build index. Okay? If I save now and if I get rid of this debug line, we can see what happens, and then we can talk about what actually we just did. Switching back over to Unity, if I now hit play, let's see. Okay, and now we have the game over button. If I now click on this, notice how the scene starts over again. Okay, so switching back over to the code. So what this line of code here does is essentially we use the scene manager.load scene function, and the load scene function, if you hover over it, essentially it's looking for an int index, okay, and it's looking for an index of the scene that it needs to build. Now in Unity, all of your scenes are essentially given an index. So if you have 10 scenes in your game, then you will have indexes, for example, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is that each scene has an integer sort of a identifier, okay? And that is what it's looking for, essentially. So what it's saying is, hey, if you can tell me the index of the scene you want to load, I can do that right now. And just to future-proof our code, the way we do this is we say, hey, scene manager, get me the active scene and get me the build index of that scene. So this is just another way of essentially passing in that integer. And that is how we're able to restart our scene. Okay, so now that we have our on restart working, we want to talk about how we can transition from this scene to the main menu scene. Coming back into Unity, what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch on to the main menu. I'm going to click on File, and I'm going to go on Build Settings. And over here, notice that once again, Unity only thinks that we have one scene. So what I can do is if I hit Add Open Scenes, notice how it adds this main menu scene. Furthermore, what we can do is essentially we can rearrange them. So if I scroll and move main menu up, it will make main menu the 0 index. So when we talked about scenes having unique identifying indexes, this is essentially what we were talking about. So in doing so, we have told Unity that, hey, we don't actually have one scene, but we actually have two. So for example, our game scene, which is happening in sample scene, has the index 1. To further drive home the point, if I now switch back to my sample scene, and if I switch on over back into my code, if over here, instead of getting the index like so, if I just pass it the integer 1, if I save now, and if I switch back, then I expect it to load the correct scene. So if I hit the play button now, alright, 2, 1, we see the button. If I now hit this button, notice how it loads the scene at index number 1, which was this scene. Okay, now you've probably already realized that this is the way that we transition between scenes, and therefore transitioning from the game scene to the main menu scene is relatively simple. Okay, so what we need now is we need a button which we can click on, which will take us to the main menu. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a main menu button. What I'm going to do is I'm going to activate this button so I can see it. And inside this button, I can right-click UI and create a new button. So notice how this essentially creates a new button inside my button. Okay, switching over to scene view. I'm going to try to arrange it a little bit better. Also, if you're wondering how I'm able to move around like so, if you hold down the right click, you can use the WASD keys to essentially move around in here and see what's actually going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and essentially put the anchors and the pivot points at the bottom of right here. So I'm going to click here. I'm going to hold down, I'm going to click on this so it moves the anchors. I'm going to hold down shift and I'm going to move the pivot points. And now I can go ahead and essentially just put this here at the bottom, but I don't want it all the way squeezed against the bottom, so we can raise it a little bit arbitrarily. And what we want to do is essentially we can go ahead and change the text from button to main menu. Okay, maybe we can make it bold, and I think this is looking good. What we also want to do is maybe we can change the color of this button to essentially match our background a little bit better. So going over here in the button, I can click on color, and I can sort of kind of fool around with this and find a nice little color, and I think this color looks fine just for now. And everything over here is looking good. I'm going to go ahead and save my scene just for good measure, and I'm going to call this my main menu button. Okay, now what we need to do is when this menu will show, just like for the onClick over here, we need to write another function, and we need to call this function from this button here. Okay, so switching back over into my code, we can write a new function. We'll call it public void on main menu. Okay, and we'll essentially call this function when the main menu button is clicked, and essentially we can say scene manager dot load scene, and we'll give it the index 0 since the main menu scene was at index 0. Over here, I'm going to go ahead and change this back, so I'll call this scene manager dot get active scene dot index build index. Okay, so over here, when I now click on the main menu button, it will load scene number 0. I can save here and switch back to Unity. Once Unity has had a second to load, I can come here on my main menu button. I can scroll down, I can hit the plus button, and it's expecting a game object. So I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop my game manager, and I'm going to look inside the game manager script for that on main menu, which is like so. Everything seems good. I'm going to go ahead and disable the game over menu since I do not want it to be shown at the time when the game starts. And if I now hit play, and just for good measure, I'm just going to make the speed 5 so we don't have to wait. I'm going to hit play. Okay. And now we have the game over button. If I click on game over, it's going to restart the game on the same level. And if I hit main menu, notice it will take me to the main menu, and you can verify that this is in fact main menu. You can also see in the hierarchy that this says main menu over here. Of course, there is no way currently to go back into the game, and we can sort that out later, but I think this is a great stopping point, and I think we've learned a lot of new stuff here. So good job, guys, and I will see you in the next video.